When the Bitcoin ETF launched in 2024, it kickstarted a multi-trillion-dollar wave of inflows, and it marked a fundamental turning point for the industry. Bitcoin went from mid-40Ks into a six-figure territory as institutions piled in for clean, regulated exposure. Today, it's the Solana ecosystem which stands at a similar inflection point, because the BSOL ETF went live despite a US government shutdown, and it quickly became the most successful ETF launch of 2025 across all assets. Investor appetite is clear, but retail sentiment is at an all-time low. So now, with a whole new wave of Solana ETFs going live this week, including Fidelity, Canary, and VanEck, the question is, can these Solana ETFs revive the bull run, or is it really all over? We've undoubtedly experienced a brutal week in crypto. BTC dropped below 92K for the first time since April, meaning crypto's largest asset by far has wiped out nearly all of its 2025 gains. ETH slipped below 3K, and SOL touched $130 for the first time since February, so it looks, feels, and smells like a complete bloodbath. But now that Bitcoin has triggered a death cross, we're at one of the most significant crossroads in price action for the year.
This is a bearish chart signal where the 50-day moving average dips below the 200-day, and that crossover tends to align with market bottoms. But if Bitcoin doesn't bounce back quickly, history shows that it often heads even lower before recovering.
That's what traders are watching now, with that fear and greed index still flashing extreme fear amidst whale selling, where a whole host of OG Bitcoin holders unloaded hundreds of millions of dollars of Bitcoin around and above that 100K mark. So how then? Despite Michael Saylor's strategy just disclosing its biggest Bitcoin purchase since the summer, are the shares slumping? Because surely if Strategy's $48 billion portfolio turned red, surely that's a sign that conviction is no longer commanding a premium here, and that there simply is no bullish catalyst remaining for the industry. Surely it's all over. Well, as it turns out, that's not true, because there is a silver lining here, which is that long-term holders' sell pressure seems to have bottomed, as we can see from this net unrealized profit chart. In fact, experts have gone on mainstream media, going as far as saying that we could in fact be near a bottom.
The Bitwise Solana staking ETF started trading on the New York Stock Exchange exactly 1 week ago. How would you say this new ETF is performing so far?
I think it's been a fantastic launch. Investors were clearly hungry for Solana exposure in a simple staking spot ETF, and they've been buying BSOL in droves. It's the fastest growing new ETF to launch this year out of 850 ETFs, not just in crypto, but across all assets. I think people recognize that Solana is one of the most exciting crypto assets on the market today. It has some of the biggest upside. I think it's a generational opportunity for long-term investors, whether you're looking at Bitcoin, Ethereum, or Solana.
So what's actually moving the ETF world despite retail sentiment? Well, to begin with, big money in TradFi looks ready to once again open the ETF floodgates this week, because Fidelity, the $6 trillion asset manager, just launched its SOL ETF. VanEck, with $160 billion of AUM, just launched another SOL ETF. Canary too entered the race, and most recently we saw 21 Shares file its very own prospectus with the SEC for a spot Solana ETF with fees as low as 0.21%, making it the sixth to launch. But it's not just Solana, because Franklin Templeton, the $1.6 trillion asset manager, also dropped an XRP ETF, and so did Amplified. So clearly, millions in capital now have easy pathways into Solana and XRP, despite crypto retail sentiment sitting in extreme fear. And the Bitwise chief investment officer captures this discrepancy perfectly.
It's a really interesting time in the market because it's almost a tale of two markets. Crypto retail is in max desperation, and the market for sort of crypto native retail is just more depressed than I've ever seen it. I think that market is close to a bottom. And interestingly, that market is still bullish. When I go out and speak to institutions or financial advisors, they're still excited. So my view of the market is we have to get through this retail flush out. We have to hit bottom from a sentiment perspective. I think we're very close to that. And then I'm optimistic that we rally into the end of the year and into 2026.
And it's worth diving deeper into Solana spot ETFs going live this week, because Fidelity launching its spot Solana ETF and Canary Marinade debuting with staking enabled on both products is major news for Solana, despite the poor price action, for two main reasons. As leading ETF analyst Eric Balchunas informs us, the Fidelity Solana ETF FSOL has low fees of just 25 basis points, easily the biggest asset manager in this category, with BlackRock sitting out. Bitwise's BSOL got out first, as we know, and now has $500 million. So with VSOL launching this week and Grayscale now too in the mix, it's game on. Now there's more to this story, because just recently we saw BSOL becoming the most successful ETF launch of the year, and BlackRock still hasn't moved. Now historically, when giants like Fidelity move first and they prove investor appetite, the biggest fish in the pond will follow. So let's unpack Canary Capital, which launched the Canary Marinade Solana ETF called SolC on Nasdaq, because the specs are quite interesting. 0.5% management fee, where Marinade Finance is the exclusive staking provider for 2 years. The assets will be custodied via BitGo, and the ETF stakes nearly 100% of all SOL minus some minor redemption buffers. Now this is the first ETF that's deeply integrated with Solana's most established liquid staking protocol. Institutions now get SOL exposure. They get Marinade secured staking options, and they get what they've been craving for almost 2 whole years, which is a regulated ETF structure for Solana. Now let's not forget that insane price rally that Bitcoin saw following the January 2024 ETF approvals, and just how far both Bitcoin as an asset and crypto as an industry have matured since then. Although the institutional demand has arguably reduced volatility, here's a poignant reminder.
What do you think? 150 by the end of the year? What do you think's happening here?
You know, I think we all want to go to the moon, but if you want to ride the rocket, you got to be prepared to pull the G's. Over 5 years, Bitcoin's had like 6 brutal drawdowns. So I think the volatility comes with the territory. If you're going to be a Bitcoin investor, you need a 4-year time horizon, and you need to be prepared to handle the volatility in this market.
So in line with what the experts we heard from have been arguing, this development is extremely significant for Solana, because with Fidelity and Canary live, the US will soon host 6 different Solana ETFs. In total, we're looking at over 4 million SOL in these instruments, worth $500 million of SOL at current levels. And before we unpack them all, here's some critical context on what these changes really signal about Solana.
I think the entire digital assets economy is exploding and growing in a bunch of different dimensions. Right now, the way to think of it is that half of the economy is built around Bitcoin. The other half of the economy is digital finance. And it's going to be built on the proof-of-stake networks that are emerging, the Ethereum Solanas, the BNBs. And the killer application for that part of the digital assets economy is tokenized currencies, a la stablecoins, tokenized securities, tokenized real-world assets, tokenized brands, and DeFi in general.
So let's dive into the Solana ETF landscape. Bitwise's BSOL offers 100% staking through Anchorage, and it monumentally became the most successful launch of the year when it reached $450 million in assets under management. But just this week, we saw $8 million in daily inflows, bringing the total AUM to $580 million since launch. So here's a comprehensive rundown of the entire Solana ETF landscape as it currently stands. Fidelity's FSOL brings heavyweight credibility to the category as the largest asset manager in the group, with an eye-watering $6.4 trillion in assets under management behind it. Now the fund charges a 0.25% management fee, and it collects 15% of staking rewards, with custody split across Anchorage, BitGo, and Coinbase. Canary SolC differentiates itself by offering fully native staking through Marinade Finance as its exclusive provider, at least for the next 2 years. Now the fund charges a 0.5% fee, as we saw earlier, and it stakes all the SOL that isn't needed for redemption or risk management, but most importantly, the 9.2% APY is likely a very important selling point for institutional investors. VanEck's VSOL entered the race with a strong incentive structure because they are waiving sponsor fees entirely, at least until the ETF launches $1 billion in assets or until February 2026. Now VanEck partnered with SOL Strategies for staking, and they seeded the fund with $7.32 million at launch, making VSOL one of the most competitively priced ETFs in the Solana category. We also heard recently that 21 Shares is set to become the 6th spot Solana ETF in the US, but their ASOL instrument is already one of the most established Solana ETPs over in Europe, charging a 2.5% fee and staking up to 100% of its SOL holdings. Now what's even more impressive here is that ASOL trades on the SIX Swiss exchange, and it uses Coinbase custody, serving as a long-running benchmark for institutional demand outside the US. And last but certainly not least, Grayscale's Solana Trust is still awaiting an ETF conversion. But with billions already flowing into its converted Bitcoin and Ethereum products, the Solana Trust is widely expected to follow. So if approved, it would instantly become one of the largest SOL vehicles in the market due to existing assets held under that trust structure. So where does that leave us in terms of price action? Well, yes, today's prices leave a lot to be desired. BTC's under 92k, ETH is at 3k, BNB is under $1,000, and SOL recovered a tiny bit to reach $139. But when asked about Michael Saylor's 150k BTC price target, here's what the Bitwise CIO had to say.
Yeah, I don't think Saylor is that far off. I think Bitcoin could easily end the year at new all-time highs. So that means getting north of about 125 up to 130,000. I think that because we continue to see strong inflows into Bitcoin ETFs, and I think you could see some positioning into Bitcoin in the end of the year by financial advisors who want to show their clients that they understand where this market is going.
So institutions are eyeing long-term positioning, while retail is on the verge of capitulation and fear in the markets is still maxed out. Historically, this is where reversals can happen. Could we go lower? Of course, but for the last consecutive days though, institutions have been steadily allocating capital to Solana, and we've seen over $420 million flowing into these instruments in just 2 weeks. So zooming out, we see that the fundamentals are stronger than the fear suggests. Because 5 Solana ETFs are now live, with a 6th entering the fold any second. Fidelity, the $6.4 trillion giant entering this arena, is undeniably a massive stamp of approval, and it could signal that even bigger names like BlackRock are likely to follow. VanEck waiving fees to $1 billion signals even more confidence. And let's not forget that the BSOL launch signals strong investor appetite for risk-on assets in Q4. Now we've seen 2 weeks of continued institutional inflows despite prices declining. And all of this is happening while the biggest treasury managers are calling this a generational opportunity. Now, I want to remind everyone that I'm not a financial advisor and none of the information in this video is financial or investment advice. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, then drop a like. It genuinely helps the channel grow. You can of course subscribe to SolanaFloor for more ETF coverage, more macro analysis, and to get notified on our full live stream from Solana Breakpoint in Abu Dhabi next month. I'll see you next time for more of the very latest.